He has watched 12 presidents come and go. He has outlived 3 recessions, 2 world wars, and every single person who told him his ideas wouldn't work at T101. When someone finally asked him what separated the people who made it from the people who didn't, he didn't talk about talent. He didn't talk about timing. He didn't even talk about hard work. What he said instead has been misunderstood by almost everyone. His name was Walter Greer. He built his first business at 23 with borrowed money and a rented telephone. By 40, he had built and sold for companies. By 60, he had mentored over 200 entrepreneurs, many of whom went on to build businesses of their own. He didn't come from money. He didn't have connections. He started with less than most people reading this right now. What he had was something else entirely. And it took him over a century of watching people succeed and fail to be able to name it precisely. Here's what you'll take away from this video. You'll understand the one quality that actually separates sustained success from the kind that collapses. You'll see the specific mistake that intelligent, hardworking people make that guarantees they stay stuck. And you'll hear the question Walter said every successful person he ever knew could answer, and most others couldn't. Here is what the culture gets completely wrong about success. IT presents success as an event, a moment, the launch, the deal, the exit, the number. We are shown the arrival and told to reverse engineer from there, to study what successful people did, copy the habits, apply the frameworks, and wait for the outcome to appear. And so that is what most people do. They read the biographies. They adopt the morning routines. They build the spreadsheets and set the goals, and listen to the podcasts and surround themselves with the right inputs. And still, something doesn't move. Not for lack of effort, not for lack of intelligence, but because they are working on the visible surface of success while the actual engine runs underneath, somewhere they haven't looked yet. The psychologist Carol Dweck spent decades studying why some people grow through difficulty and others collapse under it. Her conclusion, that it came down to a fundamental belief about whether ability is fixed or expandable, was genuinely revelatory. But Walter had observed something adjacent to Dweck's findings, and in some ways more specific. He had noticed that the most successful people he ever encountered shared not just a mindset, but a particular relationship with discomfort. A relationship so distinct, so consistent across industries and generations and backgrounds, that he could identify it in a conversation within the first 10 minutes of meeting someone. He told me he had been watching it for 80 years. And here is the question I want you to hold before we get into exactly what he found. Walter said that every genuinely successful person he had ever known could answer one question with absolute clarity, and almost no one else could. What is that question? We'll get there. But first, here is what he said it is not. The first thing Walter told me: success is not built on what you do. It is built on what you do next. He described watching 2 young men start businesses side by side in the same industry in the early 1960s. Similar backgrounds, similar capital, similar ideas. One of them built something that lasted 40 years. One of them was gone in 4. The difference wasn't the idea. The difference wasn't the market. The difference was what each of them did the first time something went badly wrong. The one who failed retrenched, pulled back, spent his energy protecting what he had built instead of adapting around what had broken. The one who succeeded did something Walter said he had seen in virtually every resilient person he'd ever known: that he got curious about the problem. Not anxious, not defensive, curious. He treated the failure like information rather than verdict. He asked what it was telling him, and he changed direction based on the answer, not based on his original plan. The psychologist Angela Duckworth, in her decades of work studying high achievers, found that the quality she called grit, the combination of passion and perseverance over the long term, was a more reliable predictor of success than IQ, talent, or opportunity. But Walter said grit without curiosity was just stubbornness. And stubbornness, he had watched, destroyed more promising people than failure ever did. What you do next, not what you planned, not what you hoped for, but what you actually do in the moment after things break, is where success is made or lost. Most people respond to the first serious obstacle by concluding something about themselves. Either that they're not cut out for it, or that the environment is unfair, or that they need a better plan before they move again. Any of those conclusions delays the one thing that actually helps: the next move. But here's where it gets harder to hear. Because the second thing Walter said is the one that most people actively resist. The second thing, the The people who succeed long-term have learned to be comfortable with a specific kind of loneliness that he said this carefully. He wasn't romanticizing isolation. He wasn't suggesting that successful people are loners or that relationships don't matter. He was describing something more precise. The loneliness of holding a conviction before the evidence is in dot of believing in a direction when no one around you can see it yet, of continuing to move when the people you respect are telling you to stop, of sitting with uncertainty long enough that clarity eventually arrives, without demanding the clarity arrive before you act. The developmental psychologist Robert Kegan spent his career mapping the stages of adult psychological development. His research suggested that the highest stage, what he called a self-transforming mind, was characterized by the ability to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously without needing resolution, to sit in ambiguity without it becoming paralysis. Walter had never read Kegan, but he described the same thing in his own language. He said, "The people who built things that lasted were the ones who could be uncertain and still move. Most people need to feel sure before they act. The ones who succeed learn to act their way into certainty rather than waiting for certainty to act. That distinction, acting your way into certainty rather than waiting, is the second quality. And it is extraordinarily difficult, because every instinct we have runs the other way. The third quality is the one that surprised me most, because it isn't about strength at all. And it's the one Walter said took him the longest to understand in himself. The third thing. And this is the one that reframes everything. Every person Walter watched succeed long-term had a fundamentally different relationship with other people's success. He described two men he had mentored in the 1970s. Both brilliant, both ambitious. Both are capable of building something significant. One of them watched other people succeed and felt diminished. Not consciously. He would never have admitted it. But Walter could see it. Every time someone in their circle made a breakthrough, this man would subtly shift, become quieter, start positioning, start competing in ways that had nothing to do with his actual goals. The other man watched other people succeed and got energized, genuinely, visibly energized. He treated every person around him who was winning as proof that winning was available, as evidence that the environment was fertile, as a reason to move faster, not a reason to feel threatened. The psychologist Martin Seligman's work on learned helplessness, and its inverse, learned optimism, found that people who explain good events as permanent, pervasive, and personal tend to persist longer, perform better, and recover faster from setbacks. Walter's observation mapped directly onto this. The man who felt diminished by others' success had, without knowing it, constructed a mental model where success was finite, a resource that ran out, a pie with limited slices. The man who got energized by it operated from a completely different model, one where success in the environment around you is a signal, not competition. Walter said he had watched this dynamic play out across 8 decades. Without exception, not roughly. Exactly. Every person he had seen sustain success over decades was someone who had learned, either naturally or through painful correction, to stop treating other people's wins as their own losses. He called it the scarcity trap, and he said it was the single most invisible thing that keeps capable people small. Because when you believe success is scarce, you start making decisions designed to protect your position rather than expand it. You stop collaborating. You stop sharing what you know. You start optimizing for relative standing instead of absolute growth. And the tragic irony is that those decisions, made to preserve success, are precisely what prevent it from compounding. So, the question Walter said every successful person could answer, the one I asked you to hold at the beginning. It wasn't what you wanted? Everyone can answer that. It wasn't what's your strategy? Most people have one of those too. The question was this: what are you willing to stay uncomfortable for? Not temporarily. Not until things get hard. Sustainably. Over the years. Over decades. Through the versions of yourself that don't work yet. Through the failures that feel permanent. Through the long middle stretch where nothing is confirming that you were right to keep going. Walter said the people who couldn't answer that question specifically, who answered it with something vague about wanting to make a difference or build a legacy, almost always eventually stopped. The people who could answer it with precision, who knew exactly what discomfort they were signing up for and had decided it was worth it, those were the people he watched build things that lasted. Success is not a reward for effort. It is the residue of a very particular kind of sustained, deliberate discomfort that most people are not willing to name out loud. And if you want to know how to actually build that kind of tolerance, practically, specifically, that's exactly what the next video covers. Because Walter didn't just describe these qualities. He described how he built them, deliberately, over time, in ways that any person, at any starting point, can replicate. That's what the next video gets into. And it starts exactly where this one left off. It's right there. Point 101 years of evidence says you should probably watch it.